Hey guys! Today we're going to be taking these Dollarama resin pumpkins and we're going to be using IOD's air dry clay and the sunflowers mold to create these cute little sunflower pumpkins. Let's get started! Okay, let's make some molds. First, dust your mold with cornstarch. That helps to release the clay so it doesn't get stuck in there. So I just dust it liberally and then I just knock the extra out, apply my clay and smooth it all out in there. I use my thumb and then I use a spatula to get the back a little bit smoother, not such a big deal, and then we just peel them out. I flip them over and these molds are super tough, so you can just like bend them and that your casting will pop right out of there. I'm just cutting out a hole for the stem, trying to eyeball the shape of it. And I'm just, what do you call this? It's kind of a dry run as to how I want to place everything on there. And there we go. A couple more little leaves and the molds will be made. Okay, so now we're going to glue these down. I'm just taking it off and we're going to start with the leaves because they're underneath the sunflower, just kind of tucked underneath. I'm just using here regular wood glue. It's a quick set glue, so it's a little bit thicker. It sets up in 10 minutes, so it's good, a good glue to use with the molds. But use whatever glue you're familiar with. Then we'll glue down these leaves and we'll continue on like this until all the leaves are glued down, and then we'll work on the big sunflower. As I'm pressing these down, I'm doing so really gently because the clay is still wet. I don't want to smush the image. I don't want to smush all that detail that's on these castings. So just be very gentle. Now we'll get this sunflower glued down. This is going to take quite a bit of glue. I just slap it on the back and then I smooth it out. These are just little wooden coffee sticks I get from the dollar store. I think it's Dollarama I get these from. Dollarama or Dollar Tree around here, those are our options, so one or the other. And in this case, I'm not super concerned about getting the glue all the way to the very points of the petals on the sunflower, just because it's gonna be kind of lifted a little bit, so I don't need to have those glued down. Okay, we'll just place that down. And I'm kind of smushing this edge in around the stem, trying to get it as smooth as I can. And then just pressing down gently on the flower itself. So I'm just taking a little paint knife here and I'm trying to really get that down in the stem. I'm trying to get it to look nice. And it's not really working for me, but I'm trying. I've decided to use trim to make that look pretty. So this is the Acanthus scroll mold from IOD, and I'm going to use this little bead string, which is really difficult to make with clay. I'm going to use a lot of cornstarch because this mold, especially that fine end, is really difficult to get out of the casting or to get out of the mold. A trick that you can use here is to just pop it, put your clay in, and then pop the whole mold in the freezer for 15-20 minutes. That will help get it out if you want the full string. I wasn't too worried about that. I just need kind of bits and pieces of it to wrap around this stem. But that's an option. The freezer trick works. Okay, so like I said, this is tough to get out. Add a little bit of cornstarch to the table so it doesn't stick. And then I'm just gonna try to ease it out without making it look all wonky. But see, it breaks apart. It breaks apart easy. There's not a lot connecting each of these little dots. So, but there we go. That's more than enough than what I need for this little project. And now the other fun part is putting glue on the back of these because they're so tiny that it's kind of hard to hold it still and apply your glue all at the same time. So I'm just going to apply this to around the stem and see how it just kind of finishes off that edge between the sunflower and the stem. And then these little beads kind of look like sunflower seeds-ish. Not really, but whatever. Humor me here. I'm just going to use a paint knife again to just push in these little areas. It's too hard to kind of stab in there with my finger. It's tiny little areas. So this kind of helps position it, get it where I want it to, and there, much, much better. Time for paint. I'm using Fusion Mineral Paint in limestone because it's a nice creamy white. And I'm going to base coat the whole piece. Now this is right after I've applied these castings, so they're not dry, not even close. But when you paint wet castings, it actually, in our climate, because we're so very dry here, it makes the casting dry slower, so you get less cracking. Cracking's not a big deal, it just, sometimes you can get really big cracks if it dries too fast. So I don't want that to happen, so we're gonna paint it while it's wet. Just be careful because you don't want to smush all that detail, and you can do that just as easily with a paintbrush as you can with your fingers. So I'm just applying this coat gently, and then we're gonna let it dry overnight. I'm gonna note here that once my paint, the surface was dry, I did go ahead and give it a second coat so it will have complete full coverage and be ready for me to finish the next day. And here we are, day 2. Okay, so this is completely dry now. Those castings are really dry and they're rigid, so we are going to go ahead and start the finishing. This is the fun part. So this is Fusion Mineral Paint's aging wax. So it's like a brown color, and I'm applying that kind of all over. So also, when I started finishing this pumpkin, I really didn't know what I was gonna do. Things pop in my head as I go and I continue on. My initial plan for this was to just put dark wax kind of in the segments, in the grooves on the pumpkin and in the details, and kind of give it that monotone appearance, but I changed my mind and it didn't turn out that way at all. So I'm applying the aging wax, and I've got some clear wax out as well. So clear wax will help you move around your aging wax a little bit more, and it kind of works as an eraser a little bit if you apply too much. So I just work around the whole pumpkin doing this same technique over and over again, just applying that aging wax. Okay, skip ahead to having completed the whole pumpkin itself, and now we're going to get going on the sunflower. Same idea, I'm just going to use the aging wax, and we're going to make these details really show up on the sunflower itself. I am using a little bit more wax on the center because at this point I'm still aiming for this whole kind of monotone look, and this is where I decide, nope, this isn't going to work. So now I've decided to go for some color. So I dug out my DIY paint making powders. These are the pigment powders. So they're just pure pigment and they're super bright. This green is, it's called Plant Lady. So how you apply them, there's so many different ways. In this way, I am putting on a clear wax on the leaf, and then I'm just dipping my brush into the pigment powder and applying it on that wax. And it gives you a really pretty, kind of a subtle color. And if you're putting it over, there's so many options with these pigment powders. You can apply them over paints, you can put them in paints, you can put them in your sealers. There's just an abundance of uses for these pigment powders. But in this case, I'm just using it to create the green here, and this just starts a whole chain of events that adds a ton of color to this pumpkin, and it works out really, really good. I put it on and I wipe it off, and I put it back on again and I wipe some more off, and I just kind of layer. This is kind of how my process goes when my plan gets side railed. So I just keep trying and keep layering until it looks how I want it to look. So it's kind of a, I don't know how to describe it. It's a process, and I just wing it until it looks pretty. Okay, so now I'm digging out the yellows and the oranges, also with the making powders. So I've got Van Gogh, which is a golden yellow, kind of a, not really mustardy, but a warm orangey kind of yellow. And then Brightside, which is bright yellow. That's the one you see right there. And see how the Van Gogh is a little bit warmer. And then there's Orange You Glad, which is, orange. So these are going to add bright, bold pops of color onto this sunflower. And I'm just, same idea, let's keep layering and just keep adding color until it looks how I want it to look. I'm just going to add again that the pigment powders are being embedded basically into the clear wax. So I'm applying clear wax to the piece, and then I'm dipping that brush or another brush or a couple brushes into the making powder and then applying it into the wet wax. And then I wipe it off and then I reapply, and it's just that same layering process, but you need something to apply the pigment powder into. You can't just apply it to dry paint. It's not going to do you any good that way. Another quick note here, I have the wax, I've scooped some wax out and I've applied it to the inside of the lid. That way I'm not dipping my pigment covered brush inside the pot of clear wax. That will contaminate your wax pot. And if you want to wax over something white, you're going to get that yellow orange color or whatever you're using. So always scoop a little bit out and use it on something else. It's easy to wipe out a lid, so that's what I use most of the time. So the center of this sunflower is most definitely not dark enough. It looks kind of weird. So I am going ahead and I'm adding more of this aging wax to try to darken it up. And it's not working. Obviously it's not working. It's a little bit darker, but it's not dark enough. So my new plan is DIY Paint also has a pigment powder basically called Decrepit Dust, and it comes in dark and it comes in white. So this is the dark. So now I'm applying this into the wax, hoping for it to get darker. It's still not dark enough. What the Decrepit Dust does do, however, is adds a huge amount of dimension to the petals of the sunflower itself. So because I'm really liking how that's starting to look, I'm going to add another layer of clear wax, and then I'm going to go ahead with the Decrepit Dust in the dark, and I'm going to add that to the sunflower. And now it's finally starting to look good. Now I'm going back and forth between the aging wax and the Decrepit Dust, and I'm just adding shape, shadow, and dimension to the pumpkin. The aging wax did a pretty good job of adding dimension to the pumpkin itself in these grooves and everything else. But adding the aging wax with the Decrepit Dust just takes it to a whole new level, and it gives it so much more depth and variation. Just visual texture for the most part. So now I'm continuing on doing that. It's all about the layers. I just keep going and keep going. There's no rules. I just keep adding until I like it. So in the ongoing dilemma of the center of this sunflower, I am now digging out Fusion Mineral Paint. These are just the little sample jars. And I've got coal black and chocolate. And I'm just gonna do a blend of the two. I'm just gonna work with them both and get this darker. And yeah, I'm just going right over all this wax and dust and everything else that I've got going on here. But it's a decor piece. This isn't furniture. This is a little decor piece, and it's gonna be fine. So I'm still just working with the chocolate colored paint right now, and I'm just really working it into all those little nooks and crannies. I've got a pretty small, fairly stiff bristled brush here to get this all in there. And then I'll come along with the coal black, and that's going to add even more dimension. And as I'm going, I realize stems are not just brown and black. There's some green tinge in there. So now I've got a little sample jar of Park Bench, I believe this one is called. It's also fusion. And I'm just adding little bits of green into that chocolate. And it's just a blend. I'm just blending the two together. I'm trying to get it as realistic looking as I can. Now here's the coal black, and you can see how much of a difference this makes. It just darkens it up a lot. Obviously it's black, and it changes the whole look of how this turns out. Yep, that's me using wax again. Keep in mind I've got this video sped up, so the paint dries super fast. I'm not just putting wax on wet paint, but it's a process. Layers upon layers upon layers. Fusion paint also dries to a matte finish, so adding the wax to the top will give this that slight, really nice warm sheen, so it'll match the rest. And some more of that decrepit dust. Now this is Fusion's copper wax. So it's a metallic wax, and it's just adding a little bit more of a glow. It's not super noticeable on here, the way that I'm applying it. It's just giving another layer, another bit of visual interest to the piece. Okay, so now it's time for the big guns. This is DIY Paint's copper patina. It's called Pennies from Heaven, and it is bold. It's paint basically with a built-in sealer, so you don't have to seal on top of this. And I'm just using my fingertip to kind of rub it over the high points and see how it just highlights all of that and adds so much more, just more. Even with the camera angle and the distance and everything, you can see how that brightens up the petals on that sunflower. This copper patina is awesome. I use it a lot. There's also a gold, but I'm not gonna lie, I use the copper way more often. I don't know, I'm just partial to it. And I'm applying it on everything. It's just adding a little bit of love to the whole thing. And I often use a baby wipe when I'm using any kind of the patinas, whether it be the dark and decrepit or the copper or the gold. It just helps me I apply it and then I can kind of blot it off, and it just gives it a little more subtle, kind of more natural look. And that's it, guys. I'm done adding layers. That is the way the pumpkin turned out, which I think it looks, I still have this pumpkin and I love it. So for a full list of the products that I used for this pumpkin, there's kind of a lot. Just check the description below and they'll all be listed there, and they're all available on my website. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this inspires you to tackle your own project.